All right. Welcome everybody. Another edition of Legend Sports and Amplify, and we are talking baseball history and Negro League history, research, art, you name it. And I am really happy tonight to have on Richard Puerzer, author and researcher. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
All right, this is great. I'm so glad. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because, as we were talking before we got on here, part of what I'm trying to do here is not only get some of the stories and work and research that many of people like yourself have done and other guests I've had on in the past, but also, one of the things that I've tried to stress as well is, and I try to put something out every day on Twitter to kind of uh, show that is everywhere in the country there's a footprint that the Negro Leagues have had over the decades through barnstorming and going back many years. And you're gonna tell us the great. I mean, I read it, it's fantastic. The what you found in your backyard, which is just a great story. And so it kind of all ties into what I'm trying to do here, and I'm really glad you're taking the time to be able to do this. Um, so I love hearing origin stories. So you are a professor at Hofstra, an engineering
That's right.
professor. So tell us how you got into baseball and research and everything else. I think it'd be a lot of fun to find out.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks
All
for
right,
asking about my origin story because I know everybody's is sort of unique, and
absolutely.
likewise mine a little bit. So I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in central Pennsylvania, and loved baseball more than any sport. I liked playing it, but I loved the history and I guess you could say the culture of it. I collected cards, baseball cards, when I was young. And I also started to dig into some of the history of the game when I was pretty young, I guess. Um, then I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my undergraduate and then later graduate work. And there was a Friday afternoon. I remember my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, lived in Pittsburgh when I started at Pitt. And I was sitting in the kitchen of my father's parents' house. And we were talking about sports, probably talking about baseball, my grandfather and I. And he mentioned that he had gone to see the Negro League teams that used to play in Pittsburgh, the Homestead Grays and Crawfords. Now, I didn't pin him down on anything back then. I didn't know that much about it back then. But I imagine, given that they lived in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, that he probably went to Homestead to see games there. But I'm sure he saw some amazing games there. And that always sort of stuck with me, that idea that my grandfather, who lived in Pittsburgh, saw some Pirate games, but he saw some Homestead Grays games, and I hope also some Pittsburgh Crawfords games. And I thought that was very cool. And so that stuck with me forever. And as I proceeded through all of my degrees, like you said, I'm an engineer. I'm an engineering professor at Hofstra. I was always sort of interested in baseball in Pittsburgh. And then I graduated eventually and moved out to eventually where I live now, Metuchen, New Jersey. And it's stuck with me ever since. And once I got into being a professor, one of the nice things about that job is that you sometimes have time. And so I've been able to take a lot of time to be able to do some research in different areas, most especially in the Negro Leagues. And so I have looked back at a lot of those teams that perhaps my grandfather has seen. And I'm interested in a lot of different things about baseball. I'm interested in baseball poetry. I'm interested in the history of
Nice.
lots of different aspects of baseball. But the one area that I've really been interested in for a long time now are the Negro Leagues. And so, segueing into what you mentioned earlier about history in your own backyard.
Hmm.
So, my family and I lived in a house. The first house we lived in here in Metuchen was down the street from the YMCA. And when my oldest son, who's now 22, was just a baby, we used to, push him around in the stroller around town. It's a very walkable town, Metuchen. And one day we were walking down the street, and there was a bit of a display in front of just somebody's house with some old pictures from town. And I was looking at it, and there was one picture of the YMCA. I could still tell that's where it was, but there was a baseball team sitting in front of the YMCA. It was a black and white picture.
Hmm.
And I looked more closely, and I believe there was a caption on that picture, and it said St. Louis Cardinals,
Wow.
1936.
The
And
Gas
so,
House Gang. Yeah.
yeah, and so this is just a block from where we live, this YMCA. And so I got interested in it, and so even back then, 20 years ago, you could hop on the internet and look up things, and I found a little bit of information that some other people had researched on a game the St. Louis Cardinals had played here in Metuchen in 1936. And so I wanted to learn more. So I went to the library, and at the time, I found that there was a newspaper in Metuchen from the late 1800s until the 1980s called the Metuchen Recorder, and they had the microfilm of that newspaper. So I went back to
Nice.
1936. I found the articles about that game. It was amazing. It was really interesting. And then I got curious. I wonder if they played anybody else. So I looked back, and in May of 1936, the Newark Eagles had played here. And immediately I looked at the box score, and I see Ray Dandridge and Willie Wells and Mule
Yeah.
Suttle. And honestly, I was equally blown away by that game as I
Mm-hmm.
was by the Gas House Gang playing in town. And so that was sort of the start of some research that I've done on baseball here in Metuchen. And originally, I just focused on that 36 season because it was amazing to me. And I found the Newark Eagles played here. And this is actually just after they became the Newark Eagles. They formed as a connection between the Brooklyn Eagles and the Newark Dodgers. So those two teams came together under Abe and Effa Manley.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it was really pretty cool to find this team playing here in Metuchen. And at the time, there were only three Hall of Famers on that team. Once Mule Suttles went in, there were now four Hall of Famers on that team, plus Effa Manley. So that
Mm-hmm.
was pretty cool. And now in recent years, and with the benefit of that newspaper being digitized, I, from my office, have been able to just look up other games. And what I found is between 1931 and 1936, and actually 1936 was the last year that these games happened, Negro League teams came regularly through Metuchen. And so I
Nice.
found about 50 different games.
Oh,
And I've found
wow.
now the the Baltimore Black Sox played here with John Beckwith, who is an amazing player.
Mm-hmm.
The I'm losing the names of my teams now, but I found Martin DeHigo played here. I found
Wow.
Judy Johnson play here. I've found a lot of different games with some amazing players play here. And again, all these games were just on a field in town. There was a bit of I guess you would call it a semi-pro team here in town, and they weren't bad. They were actually a pretty good local team. A couple former minor leaguers on the team. On occasion, they would borrow a former major leaguer, nobody of prominence, usually somebody just who had a cup of coffee in the majors, but especially a pitcher. They would have them come in and pitch. But there was one relative constant through many of these games over the years, and it was a pitcher by the name of Bud Humphreys. And so I found he was a graduate of Brown University. His father was the pastor of the Presbyterian Church in town, and he was a great pitcher. And so right out of college, and he had some relative fame in college. He had pitched in Yankee Stadium against Harvard for Brown.
Wow.
So out of college, he went to the Newark Bears and the Yankees early
Mm-hmm.
Yankees farm system,
Nice.
and he never really panned out there. And so I think then he came back to town and pitched for Metuchen as well as a couple other teams. But after that Cardinal game, which by the way, the Metuchen team won, um, he was signed by the Cardinals. So even though I'm sure the Cardinals weren't giving it 100% effort playing against some little team in central New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, he must have impressed them because he was signed by them and lasted a couple years in their minor system. Never
Nice.
made the majors, but I'm sure he had a lot of great stories to tell. And
Absolutely.
he also pitched against a lot of amazing Negro League teams and Negro League players. And so, yeah, that was one of the things that I've been able to find of late that really has interested me. And I think one of the things you mentioned earlier about local history is with these barnstorming games, you could find them in a lot of different places,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of different small towns, and be able to find some great local history there.
Mm-hmm. So let's set the stage there, right? So we're talking 1936. This is the height of the Depression.
Yeah.
So Metuchen is, from what I could see on a map, is right between, if you're coming down from New York City towards Philadelphia. So I'm going to guess there was, one of the reasons it might have been a popular stop as well was you've got to have access to transportation. We're talking 1936. There were no buses. There was no, I mean, so there had to be a rail line or something. That's how Scranton. I grew up in the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area. And so, Scranton has that same type of pipeline going between New York, and then from there you can literally go, once you're in Scranton, north to Boston. You can go south to Philly. You can go west out to Pittsburgh. It's in a lot of places. So places like that tend to end up being, you know, having some significance in historically. So now we're in 1936, and so it's interesting that you mentioned this, because barnstorming was not just a Negro League thing.
Right.
I mean, there were professional teams doing it, and the belief I think a lot of people have had is, one, somehow that barnstorming aspect negates anything that the Negro Leagues may have as far as credibility, so to speak. But they made a lot of money doing that, and
Yeah.
so I'm thinking, like, height of the Depression, if the St. Louis Cardinals in July of
Mhm.
1936, this is the middle of the pennant race, right, are
Yep.
willing to go to Metuchen, New Jersey, and play a ball game, they had to be making a couple of dollars doing that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah, there and I saw references. Nothing. Didn't see any contracts, but yeah, they had a guarantee for their game here, and even if it was rained out, they had a guaranteed. Not much. I think it was $200 in the event of a rainout. Um,
Imagine.
but yeah, they definitely were motivated to play here because of the same reasons the Negro League teams were playing here. They had an
Hmm.
off day, and they had an opportunity. And so, exactly, yeah, I think one of the things that is easy to just overlook is that the major league teams were doing this too, and for a
Hmm.
reason. So yeah,
Yeah,
in fact,
you can make
the
a lot of bit of and the other thing too, think about it. We're talking the height of the Depression. And if people, let's just take the Negro Leagues for the example. I could see the St. Louis Cardinals. This is the Gas House Gang. We're talking, how many
mhm.
Hall of Famers were on that team? You had Johnny
Oh
Mize,
yeah,
you had Frankie Frisch, you had Dizzy
Joe
Dean. I
Medwick,
mean,
yeah,
who
yeah,
else was on that team? There's 4 or 5 of them, right? And then
yep, yep,
Branch Rickey was there. I don't know, what was he? Was he general manager or
he was, yeah,
something at that time,
yeah.
right? So yeah, you had a lot of star power with the Cardinals for sure. So I could see them being a big attraction. But now we have Negro Leagues teams coming through, barnstorming, playing against that team, and people were paying money to see this, right?
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
this is the Depression. This is hard earned. I don't know what it cost. I mean, what would a game have cost back in
I
those
think
days to
there were like 30 cents, 40
30
cents.
to get in the
Yeah,
ballpark?
yeah,
But
yeah.
still, I mean, we're talking here. People were willing to pay money to see these guys play. There had to be some significance to that you don't just give up your hard-earned dollar just for no reason whatsoever. There's a reason why. So so here we are, 1936, and here come the Newark Eagles. But and like you mentioned, this was the $1 million infielder. Was it yet? I'm not sure yet, but you had Ray Dandridge, you had Willie Wells, you had Mule Suttles. They're all in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Who was the second baseman? Dick Say, was that? I think
I don't know, or I wanted to say Ed Stone was the second baseman
that
when they
year.
played here. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so there's some star power on that team as well. The Manly's involved in that, um, but they weren't the first Negro League team that came through that year, right? They were followed on the heels by several others. What other teams came after them?
So the Brooklyn Royal Giants played here. The Bacharach Giants out of Atlantic City played here as well. The Detroit Clowns, who were, if you were, looking at the hierarchy of the Negro Leagues, of course, the Eagles would be near the top. The Clowns would be a lower level team, uh, but still brought in a lot of entertainment. And one of the things that I find fascinating is when you look at baseball in the 1930s, so Metuchen's a train ride away from Manhattan. And so you could go to see the Giants or the Dodgers or the Yankees in 1936. You couldn't listen to them on the radio. The owners at
Interesting.
that time were afraid of losing fans to the radio. And so you actually literally had to go to the games to see them play. And now they're playing in our town. So you're seeing, Hall of Fame or at least major league caliber players playing here in town, which I think, again, when you think about it for the people here, great opportunity.
Hmm.
And from their side, the player side, the business side of it, it's a great opportunity for them as well.
Do you know what kind of crowds did they get for these games?
So of course the Cardinals drew 6,000 people.
And so,
Um,
how did they advertise that? That was why I'm asking that is
sure.
obviously I don't know what the population of Metuchen was back in 1936, but there's people coming from
Yeah.
outside of the city, right? So
So yeah.
how'd they get
So
the word out?
in 1930 the population was about 5,400, I think. And again, one other thing, there was very little African American population in Metuchen back then,
Hmm.
and now the population is about 15,000, so it's about tripled. But yes, they definitely were drawn from around. There was a newspaper in New Brunswick, so New Brunswick's about 15 minutes away. It's where Rutgers University is.
Hmm.
They did a lot of reporting on local baseball around the region as well, and they always covered Metuchen very well. So I know that there was a lot of press in New Brunswick that perhaps drew people here. And they even, I mean, the headline of the day of the game was usually "This game is happening here in Metuchen this day," and so yeah, they were getting press there. And then Perth
Nice.
Amboy is also down the road a little bit too, and that was a bit of a baseball hotbed as well. And I think some people came from there too. So yeah, it drew from quite a relatively large range around town.
Nice. And you know, think about that, right? You're talking a little town at the time. You just said it's
Yeah.
got 5,000 people in it, and there's 5,000 people showing up for a baseball game. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
big deal. Do you know what were the crowds that they were getting for the Negro League games? You have any idea?
So good question. I saw very little specifics. I do know that you would maybe I think it maybe topped out at about 1,000 in the early part of the season, but I think later in July, and especially when they started playing night games. So many of the
Ah,
games were night games as well. The town. So the first night game ever in Metuchen I discovered relatively recently was in 32 when the House of David team came to town and brought their own lights. And actually, Grover Cleveland Alexander, future Hall of Famer, pitched the first inning of that game for House of David. The following summer, Metuchen got their own lights. It wasn't permanent because they didn't use them for every game, but they got means to get lights anyway. And so that helped a lot because you would get your people that were coming home from the city, commuting in from the city, having the opportunity to go to games. And that's
hmm.
actually how they advertised it is for, commuters were going to start at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night.
Think about how awesome that is, right? So you got the Newark Eagles, you got the Brooklyn Royal Giants, you got the Atlantic City Bacharach Giants. Now the House of David comes through, and then
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned in your article what it was the Hawaiian All Stars. What who were they?
Yeah, again, another team put together. I haven't found a whole lot of information on anybody specific to that team, but I think it was again, sort of exotic in that they called themselves the Hawaiian All Stars. They seem to have a lot of Islanders and Asian players, or
Can
at
you
least
imagine?
that's how they were represented.
I mean, I don't think anybody would even that would be on anybody's radar to think that there would be a team of Asian ball players playing in 1936 in Metuchen, New Jersey. I mean, that is just so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
And so, and then the Gas House Gang comes in, and this is the middle of the season. Do you know? Did the entire team did they all show up? I mean, do you have box scores for those games? That
I do, yeah. The only player that didn't come to town, according to some articles, was Pepper Martin, and the reason he didn't come was his wife gave birth within the week, earlier in the week, and so he used the off day to run home, meet his newborn baby, see his wife, and then hustle back to New York City to face the Giants the next day.
wow.
But everybody else played, and there's this picture again that I mentioned, which is really the start of my knowledge of all of this. you could see DeRocher and Medwick sitting in the front of the team picture. You could see Dizzy and Paul Dean standing there.
Wow.
Yeah, they're all there. They all signed autographs. I believe Dizzy Dean coached first for a while during the game. Um, so yeah, the whole team was here.
Very cool. Who pitched? Do you know?
So they actually used a couple older pitchers. One was named Flint Ream.
Oh, I know.
Um,
I've heard that name.
and so I believe it was he who pitched in a doubleheader the previous day,
Yeah.
and they had him throw against Metuchen the next day.
Wow.
And then they used a second pitcher once he got tired, and I honestly can't remember his name off the top of my head. I want to say his last name was Walker. Both these guys were towards the end of their career. It was actually the last year of their careers, but they had been respectable pitchers earlier. And I'm sure, on one hand, they're not up there to blow away the Metuchen
Hmm.
batters, but they're major league pitchers, and again, one had pitched the previous day, so on one hand he may have been tired, but on the other
Hmm.
hand, he's throwing games in the majors.
Hmm.
So
Who pitched for the Eagles?
so for the Eagles, off the top of my head, it wasn't Leon Day, so he's the one Hall of Fame pitcher from that team.
Hmm.
Um, I honestly don't remember. I do have a box score, and I don't have it at my fingertips.
Hmm.
Um, but I can tell you that there was another game played earlier, so a couple years earlier, where and now I need to just remember the name of the team that came in, and boy, I'm having some memory
That's okay.
pauses here. But what I can tell you is Biz Mackey, who is in the Hall of Fame as a catcher,
Hmm.
it was actually Hilldale. So the Hilldale team outside of Philadelphia came in and played in Metuchen, I want to say in 1934. And Biz Mackey actually was the starting pitcher for the team
Wow.
that game. And he struck out 11, which back then was a pretty high number. And so I think, again, on one hand, that shows you the difference between these great elite Negro League teams and a
Hmm.
semi-pro team from Metuchen. On the other hand, it shows you Biz Mackey's just amazing skill as a baseball player as well.
Absolutely. And that is so cool. I mean, sitting there, I mean, it sounds like it was, I mean, it certainly wasn't something you were searching for, but you see this
Yeah.
picture and it turns into this.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, it's just fantastic, and that's the kind of stuff I think that people, if they looked around, they might find that in a lot of places because I can go. I do my little amateur sleuthing on newspapers.com and a couple of other
Hmm.
places that just to find some things that I can post here or there. And it is not that hard to find some little small town anywhere that did not have a barnstorming tour team of players, somebody who came through. And if you just looked, you're going to find it. It's there. Yeah.
So I'm gonna give you one good side of some things I found, and one heartbreaking side of this. One of the good things is the field where they played is now the location of the elementary school in town, and there is a softball field there, and my kids have played there over the years, and so now I know that they're playing on the same field again, graced by these amazing players
Very
85
cool.
years ago.
Very,
The
very cool.
heartbreaking piece, the heartbreaking piece is, you know, of course, I'm looking for name recognition when I'm looking for some of the players that played here.
Hmm.
The Cardinals have it because of Dizzy Dean, most especially. But I was looking for Josh Gibson to play in town. And in 1934, again, was a big season for them. The Pittsburgh Crawfords were scheduled to play here, and the game got rained out about 2 hours before game time. And so
Oh.
that's a team that had Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell
Oh
and
my.
Oscar Charleston. Yeah. So
Wow.
those guys, I hope, were in town. I hope, got to the field. I hope, didn't play. But if I had had that, I would probably
Show
be able to get the
show
whole
us your
population.
show us your jersey.
Yeah.
I
So I'm wearing
You
my
got your
Crawford jersey.
Crawfords. All right. Nice. You know, so where would yeah, do you have any idea where would they have stayed in town? Would they have left? What would have happened after a game was over, especially if it was a night game?
Great question. And I don't know. I mean, nowadays we're about an hour and 15 minutes from Philly. So I'm sure if it was Hilldale, unless they were heading north and playing games up there, they might have gone back there. The other possibility is, again, New Brunswick is a bigger town, so perhaps that's where some of the teams stayed. I mean, nowadays there aren't hotels or motels really in Metuchen, so I doubt that anybody was really staying in town. They probably were heading
Man.
one direction or the other.
You know, you know how many times I've heard in the last couple of months to a year of talking to people and then trying to relay these stories, and people have then said to me outside of this, boy, that would make a great movie. That would make a great miniseries. I'll tell you what, this summer of 36 in
Yeah,
Metuchen, New Jersey would make one heck of a great movie, boy. You guys, that would
yeah,
be that would be so cool. I mean, to think of who came through, who was involved, this the star power that was there, why they came through, middle of the depression. There's a lot of compelling stories
oh yeah.
going on there. It is really good. That is really cool stuff. Thanks, man. That was some great. That was some great work to be able to dig up all that. And you said that some of those. You said what into the 1800s you found?
Oh, so no, I actually only have found games in the 30s,
Okay.
but this newspaper goes back to the 1800s. So I have looked around for other things and I've not found any gold. I have found when Joe Medwick played high school football, high school baseball
He's
in
from New
town.
Jersey, right? Isn't he
Yeah,
from?
yeah, from Carteret, New Jersey, just a little bit down the road. So
You
yeah, when he was 16, 17 years old, he was playing on fields here, but um, not no other teams that I've been able to find gold in the 20s or anything like that.
Ducky Medwick was a high school football player. How
Hmm.
about
I
that?
think
Boy,
he played
that's
many
a
sports. Yeah,
that's some
yeah,
cool stuff. You know, they probably all did, yeah, I'm
yeah.
sure. But boy, oh boy, that's pretty cool to think of Ducky Medwick playing football. I mean, many of them did, but I'm sure you wouldn't put that would not be the first thing I would think of being a baseball fan to see him playing football. But very, very cool. So, one of the works that you did that since you got your Crawfords, which is the Pittsburgh tie-in, but the other work that you did I thought was great was the last Negro League World Series of 1948, and that was called um, the Barons, the Grays, and the '48 World Series.
Hmm.
Bittersweet Goodbye. I just want to put that up so people can see that because what can you tell us about the work you did on that particular book?
So I've been interested in a lot of playoff or World Series or championship sort of series um, for a while. And I could tell you a little bit about the 35 series as well, the 46 series, but the 48 series was really interesting because, like you said, it's really the last real World Series. By 48, a lot of players were leaving the Negro Leagues and going into the major leagues, of course, led by Jackie Robinson. But in that 48 World Series, you have Willie Mays playing center field as a 17-year-old, I believe, for the Birmingham Black Barons. You have Artie Wilson. You have, some amazing
Mm-hmm.
players there. And then on the Grays, you have Buck Leonard. You have just again a really strong team. And so it was sort of and one thing that I find fascinating about a lot of these World Series games is how they moved around, how they were
Mm-hmm.
really not like what we think of today in terms of a championship series where you're just stationed in the two towns where the teams come from. They were moving around trying to, on one hand, be able to get new customers because they would be able to go to new cities and play. But on the other hand, spread the magic and be able to
Interesting.
play in a lot of these different cities and be able to really show off. So, um, yeah, there's been some really amazing and interesting playoff series, um, and stories that go along with these things as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the stories of the 46 series is, of course, Jackie Robinson is in the minor leagues in 1946 playing for the Montreal Royals.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the attention of the black press was on him during this time when he was playing in what was called the Little World Series for Montreal. And yet, at the same time, you have the Newark Eagles taking on the Kansas City Monarchs and them getting a little bit less press. And even
Interesting.
in that series, went 7 games, and allegedly, Satchel Paige was set to start the seventh game, but didn't show up because he was busy making arrangements for a barnstorming tour that was going to start the next day. and many of the best players from both the Eagles and the Monarchs joined him on that barnstorming tour that again started the
Oh my
next year.
goodness.
And so, yeah, you had a lot of different, competing things
Dynamics,
out
yeah.
there, while at the same time
I
having
didn't.
amazing baseball.
When Phil Dixon joined me a couple of weeks back, a month or so ago, we talked about some of those dynamics, and one of them I didn't realize. And I'm a Pennsylvania guy. You're from Harrisburg. I'm just from up the road, an hour away up in Scranton, but that area, Old Forge is actually the little town I'm from.
Hmm.
But the and it's much like what you talk when you talk about Metuchen. There's only about 5,000 to 6,000 people in Old Forge, Pennsylvania, and that's the way it's always been. But anyway, the blue laws impacted. Uh,
Yeah,
they couldn't play on Sundays, so that very first World Series of 1924, they ended up playing in Baltimore, I believe,
hmm.
because I guess it was kind of on the way. The Hilldales were playing Kansas City, and then they ended up, because they couldn't play in Pennsylvania
Yeah,
on Sunday. They ended up playing in a couple of others. I think there was another game in Chicago as well
yeah,
because of
yeah,
that same dynamic. So interesting. I mean, it's things that people. You need to kind of wrap your head around it. There is not the same sanitized
hmm,
version of baseball that we've probably all grown up with most of our lives. I mean, there isn't that same thing of the standardized, the box scores and the standings, and people traveled and they had laid out schedules where they 3 games here and then they moved over here.
yeah,
This was a little bit more dynamic, and not just the Negro Leagues.
sure,
Major League Baseball, had the same difficulties for many, many years when it came to the way they had to travel and schedule and wars and depressions and everything else. So it really is something that you got to kind of put yourself into that time frame or that year in order to understand what was all going on. And then, throw in the fact that the Negro Leaguers were dealing not only with um, those dynamics, but now you're talking segregation and Jim Crow
yeah.
and a whole another level of stress and other dynamics that you could not even fathom today for the
Well,
most part.
yeah, and one point there, again, I'm a happy and proud Metuchen resident nowadays, but in 1934, so in the same article about Biz Mackey I'm sorry, the same issue of the newspaper of Biz Mackey striking at 11, there's an article, and not a positive article, but a reporting article of a Klan rally just outside of Metuchen in 1934, up here in New Jersey. So
Boy, oh boy.
that was going on, simultaneous to this. So I mean, I'm so glad that we have the positive here, the great games and the hosting of these teams in town. But you still see things like this, and I'm sure the players faced a lot of this all over, and not just in the South, but up here in the North as well.
Hmm.
So
See, and that's something I guarantee you. I'm glad you pointed that out. Many people would not even. Most of the time, you think of KKK, you're thinking of the South and the
mhm.
Deep South, but no, they kind of were here.
Yeah, yeah,
Anywhere
yeah,
you wanted to look, they were going to run into potentially the same sorts of issues and problems and difficulties of just trying to. I mean, basically, just trying to go to work. I mean,
yeah,
to me, I mean, it just blows me away to think that just simply because of that sort of racism and bigotry, you had these kinds of issues. It's just it's hard to fathom,
yeah,
and it's unfortunate, and it's something that I think you need to kind of people need to kind of make sure that they understand that and not just say, well, it happened a long time ago,
right,
because
right.
it's part of the fabric of everything that goes on, and it's affected so many things. And with this recent announcement, let me just tell you some of the conversations I've had recently. This announcement, first the Major League Baseball one in December, but then this one this past week with Baseball Reference announcing. And I have had so much pushback from people in various, message boards, forums, places that I am on, that they just cannot fathom the fact that why are these statistics now being muddying up everything, and they're not grasping
Right.
what
Yeah.
it is right now. Did you have any were you involved in any of that process with either Major League Baseball or with Baseball Reference? I know Saber has been involved a lot with the Baseball Reference side, especially.
So not directly. I'm friendly with a couple of the people that are thankfully part of this, and thankfully being able to um, finally have some of this done. I did have a small article in the book that Todd Peterson edited called the Negro Leagues Were Major Leagues.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that article, what I looked at, and this was sort of putting my engineering or at least my statistician's hat on, I looked at the 1925 season in the Negro Leagues and in the major leagues and compared the statistics of the batters and the pitchers in a relatively basic way. I don't want to make it sound like I was able to,
Mm-hmm.
have earth-shattering conclusions here. But what I did find is not just if you're looking at averages. I mean, when we look at anything, when we look at any data, we can't just look at what the average is. We need to sort of look at the distribution of the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was really tried to look at the distribution of the data of things like batting average, slugging percentage, things that we could calculate from the data that was available from back then, as well as on the pitching side. And what I found was essentially the distribution in the major leagues was very, very close to the same distribution in the Negro Leagues, and leads me to believe that the skill sets in both leagues were very much equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
There was one big exception there, and that was earned run average. And I found that in the Negro Leagues, the earned run average was what I would call significantly, from a statistical point of view, higher than that in the major leagues. But I dug a little bit. And what I found was there were way more earned runs and way fewer unearned runs, to put it pretty basically, in the Negro Leagues because there was less of a standardized official scoring system. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
official scoring was done by people on the bench, just saying, no error there. And there were a
Mm-hmm.
lot fewer errors, basically, that were
Interesting.
categorized in the Negro Leagues. And fewer errors means more earned runs, which means higher ERAs for those pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you look at 1925 and you look at the stars of the major leagues like Rogers Hornsby, Walter Johnson, and then you look at the stars in the Negro Leagues like Oscar Charleston and um, let me think. A pitcher's not coming to mind right now from 1925. But when you look at them, you can compare them sort of head to head. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at the whole, when you're looking at the leagues, again, I'm finding that they're basically those distributions are laid on top of each other, really making me think that it's the same distribution of talent. And so, again, if the Negro Leaguers had been playing in the major leagues back then, they would have elevated that talent and made it a better experience.
That's something that I keep trying to point out with people as well. Is to me, baseball is the ultimate zero sum game, right? And especially when it comes to the rosters. If someone's on the roster, someone's off the roster, right? So, and if someone's in the majors, then they're not in the minors, and if they're not on the majors, they're down in the minors, and then it's a cascading effect, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, Major League Baseball today is made up of not quite half, but roughly half non-white players, whether they be Asian, Hispanic, African
Mm-hmm.
American, whatever the case may be, from all over the world, right? So it's 40 some percent, right? Now I don't know if that would have been the case back in you know uh, the early days because the population distribution was different then, but I think it's safe to say that there's a significant portion of Major League Baseball, we're talking American League and National League, that would have not been there
Yeah, yeah.
if they would have been down in AAA, and then the whole cascade effect. And the
Mm-hmm.
color barrier and segregation impacted all levels of baseball, not just it was there through the minor leagues as well. And so, like you just pointed out, I mean, it was a um, the talent that should have been in Major League Baseball was not what it could have been,
Yeah.
and it's a shame. It really is, and for the reason why it was is even more, disappointing that all those years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I completely look at it that way. But I also want to say that the fact that the Negro Leagues existed, the fact that these players, these owners, these fans, this infrastructure existed, um, just speaks to the ability of all of these people to break barriers
Persevere, yeah.
and to really take it upon themselves to say, well, we can't do this. They're not going to let us, but we're going to do it ourselves. And I think
Hmm.
that, um, I mean, that goes beyond baseball. That's sort of the human spirit of what these people are able to do.
Hmm. Can you sum up? How would you put it if someone said to you that no, the Negro Leagues were not major leagues? What would you tell them?
So I would first, because I have some of this statistical analysis done, I can point that out. And then secondly, there's no question, and some people have done this better than me. Again, Todd Peterson has a
Hmm.
fantastic article on how the players that eventually then were moved into the majors, how they not only performed very well but exceeded the
Hmm.
ability and the performance of a lot of white players, and how just when you look at the transition, how African Americans dominated for a long time.
Oh my goodness, yes.
I mean, that's it's clear that they were far better than many of the national leaguers and American leaguers who were playing before they were allowed to play in the majors.
Hmm.
And on top of that, it just again taking it absolutely, all of the stories that we hear and all of the statistics that we have from the Negro Leagues again just speak to the ability of these players, and it's it's just clear to me, and I think it could be clear to anybody that digs in a little bit, even a
Hmm.
little bit, that those players were as good, and for some of them, better.
Hmm. No, I absolutely agree. Something I always try to point out. I mean, after Jackie Robinson through the 50s, what was there, 11 most valuable player awards went to
Yeah.
former Negro League, or 9, 10, 11, something like that. Rookie of the Year awards, you name it. And it they didn't just spring out of the earth and,
Right.
and become stars. They learned it there. And
Yeah.
they were playing there. I mean, you take a great example. I love Monty Irvin, and he, like many of these guys in the 40s, had some time cut because of World War II and so forth. But he was, I believe, 29, 30. I'm not sure how old he was when he finally got a chance to play. So he's already, in baseball terms,
Hmm.
especially for those days. I mean, now guys tend to play a little longer because of lots of reasons, but
Yeah.
but the in baseball terms, that's already starting to get towards
Yeah.
the backside of your career. And so you wonder, what if some of these guys have been able to come in their prime, young. I just was talking to, not talking to, but conversing online with someone whose grandfather was schoolboy Johnny Taylor
Hmm.
from Connecticut. And, um, there's a guy who they just recently renamed his high school in Connecticut for him this
Wow.
past April. But he came out of high school as a huge prospect. If you think of, this was, I think, 1935. And so he was scouted by the Phillies, by the Yankees, several other Major League Baseball teams, until they showed up and found out that he was black.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
they that was where it dropped. And so he ended up
Yeah.
playing in the Negro Leagues, playing in Mexico, several other places. And so you wonder, had he been able to come out of high school into a team like the Yankees,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
may have happened? I mean,
Hmm.
sure, first round draft picks today, there's no sure thing, but I can bet he may have had a little bit better opportunity, had he had been given the opportunity. And it's a shame, but you can't go back at this point. But I think people need to be aware of these stories, and they need to keep that in, take that into consideration. You
Hmm.
cannot discount any of that because it's an important part of everything, not just the baseball history, but the country's history. So
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you did a couple of other things um, as well. How did you what the book about the Oakland A's? How'd you get into doing that? Because it's an interesting title, Mustaches and Mayhem.
So I contributed the script or so SABR, so the Society for American Baseball Research,
Hmm.
has for about a decade now had an amazing project called Bio Project, where the intention of it is to write a biography on every single person who's played in the major leagues.
Hmm.
And it even goes beyond that. It has stories about stadiums, has stories about announcers, and so on.
Hmm.
And so, thankfully, someone had the idea to put together books on special teams, special events, again, around the Negro League World Series, and then looking at the teams involved. And so, the Oakland A's were, again, one of those special teams, winning 3 World Series in a row
Hmm.
in the early 70s. And I always have been fascinated again by different players for different reasons. And I really like Ken Holtzman because of a baseball card. I believe it's the 76 baseball card. It always just held some fascination for me. And so I jumped at the chance to be able to write a bio of Ken Holtzman. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do that and have that included in that book. And again, in that book, you'll find bios on everybody, whether they were Reggie Jackson or Catfish Hunter, or some of the much lesser known players on those A's teams, but still made them go and made them special and fun. And so, yeah, the ability to do that and get those kinds of things published as a group effort is really an amazing labor effort over these last couple of years, and
Absolutely.
it's been a lot of fun.
Hmm.
I have a very soft spot in my heart for Mark Fidrich. Um, so I was 9 years old in the summer of 1976, and I have no idea if I saw the June game where he pitched against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. I'm sorry, in Detroit, and really turned the country.
Hmm.
Got
Bird
the country
watchers, yeah.
momentum. So I loved Fidrich and the concept of Fidrich and things like that. And over the years, I've noticed that a lot of other people have too.
Hmm.
And there are poems written about Mark Fidrich. There's a movie which is unfortunately it's a very indie movie, but it's a very enjoyable movie called Dear Mr. Fidrich. And I
Huh.
got in touch with the guy that did that movie because I always read about it online, but I never saw it. And he shared a DVD with me, and it's the story of a kid growing up in Detroit who writes him a letter, and he wrote back, and then that sort of impacts that kid as he's growing up and his life, and it's a
Wow.
really cute, not cute, it's a really neat movie. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that. But so I put a lot of these other things together regarding Fidrich into, again, a bio of Mark Fidrich, who, again, on one hand, really had one great season and then part of a good season. And I can't remember how many games total he won, but I believe it's under 30. But at the same time, and again, also died a tragic death, died
Hmm.
relatively young. Um, but whose spirit after he left baseball was always very positive. He had no bitterness in his life at all. He just was happy to have played, and so stories like that and
Are
the
awesome.
ability to write those things, yeah, they're
Hmm.
awesome.
They
And
really are. I mean,
yeah,
there are so many little, I'm sure, from human interest to inspirational to whatever that can be written around things like that. It's a great story, dear Mr. Fidrich. I mean, think about. I mean, I can think about how that would impact and how you could make a story out of that. Very, very cool. And then you mentioned Catfish Hunter, right? Just to give you an idea, we're talking about this stepping on history here or there. My brother lives in Virginia Beach, and he goes down into eastern North Carolina, the Outer Banks, Inner Banks, quite a bit. And so he's driving down there a few months back, and he crosses over this bridge, and there's the sign that says the Catfish Hunter Memorial Bridge. And he's like, "Wow, that's pretty cool." So he gets into town, and in the little tiny town of Hertford, North Carolina, and in this little shopping center, squeezed in between a couple of, probably a hardware store and whatever else, is the Catfish Hunter museum.
Hmm.
And it's just a little hole in the wall that's dedicated to everything about Catfish Hunter because he grew up in Hertford, North Carolina. That's why there's a Catfish Hunter Memorial Bridge. And then come to find out that just down the road are the Edenton Steamers, which is a summer league, high school, college level summer league for early draftees and so forth to play. And so there's this whole little world down there that
Yeah.
outside who probably don't even realize it was even there. So that kind of stuff is all around you. People just need to look. I mean, baseball's got
Yep.
a long and beautiful and rich history that goes back a long way, and it's been such a part of kind of the fabric of the country for such a long time that it's there. It's all over the place. I know, just the Negro League. There's not much that I can recall from growing up in that Scranton, Wilkes-Barre area, but I do know in the 70s when I was a kid, the Clowns came through
Hmm.
and played at Shout Stadium in Dunmore, and this was a little stadium that the Scranton Red Sox played in. They were a farm club, like probably Class C or D for the Boston Red Sox. So many players came through over the years. Bobby Doerr,
Hmm.
several others that played there. And so I think that was one of the reasons why many people I knew as growing up they saw that and said that that's what the Negro Leagues were because it was more of a vaudeville. It was kind of like a king in his who Eddie Feiner is, right? I mean,
Hmm.
the king
Hmm.
in his court. So,
Yeah.
and I think that stuck in people's heads, and it's hard to get some of those things out of their
Yeah.
heads,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last thing too, since I don't want to leave without talking to you about this, you said you grew up a Pirates fan,
Hmm.
and so you did some work about Pops and the We Are family. Tell us about that one.
So again, another great Saber project, bio project was on the '79 Pirates, and I very clearly remember watching all of those games in the World Series where they came back against the Orioles and beat the Orioles. And one other thing I've been interested in for a while, in part because of my again engineering background. I'm an industrial engineer, which is sort of unique in that we look at both the statistics and the engineering side of things, but also the management sides of things. And so I wrote about Pete Peterson, the general manager of that team. And it turned out I did not know he grew up in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, just down the road from where I live now. Um, and how he made his way as a player first. He went to Rutgers University. He went into the Pirate system, and I want to say he had an injury. I believe it was a broken leg that eventually turned him into coaching, and then he went into management and became one of the architects of that We Are Family 1979 Pirates team. And again, great team, great players. I'm looking forward to reading the brand new biography of Dave Parker, Cobra,
Mm-hmm.
Parker and David Jordan. And so again, it's fun to be able to dig into those things, find out about who these guys were, what it was like for them growing up, what it was like for them to make their path through their career, and then see some of the successes that they've had. So that was again a big fun project that I was able to be a part of.
Awesome. Absolutely. I remember that 79 season fondly as well, but I'm a Phillies fan, so I remember it from a different
Mm.
perspective. All I
Yeah, yeah,
remember
yeah.
was boy, oh boy, it didn't matter how what the lead was, what the inning was. At some point, the Pirates would find a way to come back on the Phillies and beat them. And particularly in that year, they always had the Phillies number in the '70s. It seemed anyway. But all I remember is this: oh no, John Milner would come up and he would find a way, or Bill Robinson, or they had all these players. Many of them were role players at that point in their
Yeah.
career. Were good players, but they weren't all um, big name stars at that time. I mean, Parker was, Madlock probably was, even though he doesn't get
Yeah,
the
yeah.
credit that he deserved. But I can't think of too many others. I mean,
You had your Phil Garners and
Stargell,
your
that
Tim
was it.
Foley. Yeah, they really did have.
That was a
They had
fun team. Chemistry, right?
Stargell.
Yeah, they,
Yeah,
they had the
yeah,
chemistry. I mean, I
yeah.
loved Omar Moreno. I mean, that was just a fun team. And they just found ways, and they certainly found ways to beat the Phillies all the time. That was the first year that Pete Rose had just left Cincinnati and gone to Philly. So there was big expectations in Philadelphia
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that they were going to run away with that division. And here the Pirates, not only did they win, they win the World Series, which is which was very
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah.
That was very cool. So
Now,
Rich,
as a Pirate fan, unfortunately, it's the last time they won the World Series. But
true,
uh,
yeah, and it's been lean. I know that these last
yeah,
couple of years, especially, I follow a couple of pirate people who are pirate fans online, and it's like, yeah, they're not real happy with the state of the way things are going there.
no, and when you look at all of the talent that they've pretty recently let go,
Yeah,
it makes you wonder. But
you know,
there's always tomorrow. So I'll keep positive.
that's the beauty of baseball. I mean, it just, I mean, you know what? We'll get them next season. We'll get them
Yep.
next, and the thing about a baseball season, I always have loved. I mean, to me, baseball is the most beautiful sport going. I mean, because there's no time, there's no clock. It's over
Hmm.
when the other team says it's over. I mean,
Hmm.
you have to earn you have to earn it being over. You have
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
that last out, and
Yeah.
I've always thought that that was what really made it, a fun sport. Also because you didn't necessarily have to be the. It's great to be the five tool player, but
Hmm. Hmm.
you can find a way to play and contribute and be a role player and do other things in baseball that makes it a lot of fun. Rich, this was great. I appreciate your time. Any other thoughts? What are you working on now?
Uh, Good question. I want to write up this additional history that I found here in Metuchen. I want to see if I can't put that together and really focus on the Negro League games that were a part of that, and see if I can't get that out there in the world. Um, I also this later this summer, there's going to be another Saber book on the 1942 Negro League World Series,
Oh,
and
nice.
or I'm sorry, not on the World Series, but on the Monarchs, actually focusing on the Monarchs. But they played in the World Series against
Hmm.
the Homestead Grays, and I was again lucky enough to be able to write the story on that on the World Series there.
Boy.
Um, and I'm always just looking around at other little things that I can find a lead on and then do a little bit of research on and then hopefully be able to put together. But those are the things I'm working on right now. So yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Best of luck with them. I keep going. The stories that you told about finding in your own backyard all of that great history and stories. Like I said, I mean, that would make a great miniseries or movie. I mean, just at the summer of '36, and think of what came through 5,000 people in Metuchen, New Jersey.
Yeah.
It's just a really, really cool project. It really, really is. And I wish I wish you well with all that. I hope that you're able to keep on going and keep digging on that stuff. It's good.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank you for also promoting these kinds of things,
Yeah, I'm going to keep
this
on
history
going.
on the.
I think that like I mentioned to you even before we got on here, is there are so many people that have dedicated a lot of time in their life to a lot of these stories, and I don't think enough people know about them. I mean, I've had on Phil S. Dixon and Kevin Mitchell, Larry Lester, James Brunson, you name it. I had Todd Peterson was on one of the first ones I had on back in March, I think, or April. I started doing these. Pete Gordon was the first one that I had on, who's doing a lot of that work with the Donaldson, uh, effort to get him into the Hall of Fame. And I'm also putting on other people. There's like I said, Brian Powers with Bandbox Ballparks. That is a lot of ballpark preservation and history involved that he's involved in. There's artists. There's all sorts of people that are many of them have spent a lot of time and years and effort at this, and you do it because you love it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's
You have a passion
you
for it.
have a
Yeah, yeah,
passion
yeah.
for it. But the other nice thing about it is I've also met many people recently that a lot of this is new to them, especially when it comes to the Negro Leagues, and that's a great thing too,
Yeah.
because I'm going to have some young authors coming on in the next couple of weeks that there has to I'm trying to get other people. You need the next generation. The next people are going to take the
Hmm.
next step because there's a lot of work to be done, right? I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And we need to keep it going. And yeah. So I applaud all of your efforts at
oh, thank you.
broadcasting this and making providing the forum for a lot of really
Thank you.
great people to be able to talk about these things. So I
Thank
appreciate
you. I appreciate that. And we'll, down the road, you get some other things you're working on, and anytime you want to come on, I'd love to hear more about what you dig out of Metuchen, New Jersey, as well, because that's very very cool. I'm going to see if what else I can find, because I guess I know a lot of people from that corridor between New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania that. I'm going to get them and starting to look around, see what they could find in their backyard too. Maybe you guys could collaborate on some things. That'd be pretty
it. Yeah,
cool.
that would be. Yeah. Okay.
All right,
Sounds
Rich,
good.
I really appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun, and we'll do this again soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
All right, you have a good night now.
Alrighty. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.